Welcome back to Veil of Night. I'm your host. Before we get into tonight's submission, I wanted to take a second to check in with all of you. Our last story regarding that specific ritual, the Pitches Ritual, was one of the darkest we've ever shared here. I've been reading through your comments, and it seems like it hit home for many of you. Some said it was too close for comfort, while others are asking for more high-stakes occult encounters. Let me know in the comments, Dadu. You want us to stay in that realm of ancient rituals? Or do you prefer the more wrong place, wrong time style of horror? I'm here to tell the stories you want to hear. Tonight's story was sent to us by a listener named Marcus. Marcus is originally from the UK, the Cotswolds area, but this happened while he was living in a remote part of Vermont in the States. About 5 years ago, he was 26 at the time, working a seasonal job. He reached out to me via email last Tuesday. He said he's never told his family about this because they already thought he was city soft for being nervous about the woods. He's sharing this now because he recently saw a photo of the property online, and something about it, well, it made him realize he wasn't just imagining things. He asked me to keep the exact town name private. He just wants to warn anyone who thinks that a cheap, isolated rental is always a hidden gem. Sometimes, things are hidden for a reason. Let's step into the woods with Marcus. I'm not a paranormal guy, or at least, I wasn't. Back in England, the oldest thing I'd encountered was a 400-year-old pub with a drafty door. But New England, Vermont, that's a different kind of old. It's a heavy, suffocating kind of old. I had taken a job as a researcher for a local historical society. The pay was rubbish, so I found a cabin for rent on Craigslist. It was cheap, suspiciously cheap. It was a small, 2-story saltbox house tucked so far back into the pines that the GPS stopped working about a mile before the driveway started. The owner was an elderly man named Mr. Henderson. He didn't meet me there. He just left the key under a stone and told me, "Don't leave the porch light on after midnight. It attracts the moths." I thought he was just being a typical thrifty New Englander. Moths. Fine. I can deal with bugs. The first week was peaceful. If you've never been in the deep woods at night, you don't realize how quiet it actually is. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a waiting quiet. But I stayed busy. I'd get home around 6 p.m., cook some pasta, and sit at the small wooden desk in the upstairs bedroom to finish my reports. That bedroom had one large, rectangular window that faced the dense tree line. The glass was old, wavy, and distorted. About 10 days in, I started noticing the sound. It wasn't a ghost sound. No chains rattling or whispering. It was a rhythmic thud. Just one. Every night, around 11:15 p.m. Thud, like someone had dropped a heavy book in the room below me. The first time it happened, I went downstairs with a kitchen knife, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. The doors were locked. The windows were shut. I figured it was the house settling. Old wood expands and contracts. Right. That's what I told myself. But then, the moths started. It was a Tuesday. I had forgotten Mr. Henderson's rule. I'd left the porch light on because I'd been hauling in groceries late and just forgot. Around midnight, I heard something hitting the front door. Not a knock. It sounded like someone was throwing wet sponges at the wood. Splat. Splat. I looked through the peephole. There were no moths, but there were marks on the wood. Long, oily streaks. about 5 feet up. I turned the light off instantly. My hands were shaking, and I don't really know why. It was just a feeling, a sudden, overwhelming instinct that I was being watched by something that didn't have eyes. I went upstairs to bed, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, and that's when I looked at the window. The moon was bright that night, casting the shadows of the pines onto my floor. Because the glass was so old and distorted, the trees looked like they were moving, even though there was no wind. I saw a shape. It was at the very edge of the glass. A pale, thin, vertical line. I thought it was a birch tree. But then, it moved. It didn't sway. Slid. It slid from the left side of the window to the right, perfectly horizontal. And it was high. This was a second-story window. Whatever that was, it was 12 feet tall, or it was climbing. I stayed frozen for 2 hours. I didn't call the police. What would I say? Officer, a tree moved. I'd sound like a lunatic. The next morning, I went outside to check the ground under the window. There were no footprints, but the bark on the trees nearest to the house. It was not like a bear or a deer. It looked like someone had taken a giant rasp and filed the wood down until it was smooth and white. I should have left then. I really should have, but I had no money, no other place to go, and I was 3 weeks away from finishing my contract. I convinced myself it was a local animal, maybe. A moose with some kind of disease. I followed Henderson's rule religiously after that. Lights off by 10 p.m. I lived in total darkness. I'd sit on my bed with a flashlight, waiting for 11:15 p.m. There it was, every night. On the 18th night, the thud didn't come from downstairs. It came from the roof, right above my head. Thud. And then, a scraping sound like fingernails on shingles. Slowly, the sound moved toward the edge of the roof, right above the window. I turned my flashlight off. I didn't want it to know I was there. I backed into the corner of the room, staring at that wavy, distorted glass. A hand came down. It didn't look like a human hand. The fingers were too long, maybe 8 or 9 inches each. They had too many knuckles. It pressed against the glass. The glass didn't break, but it groaned. The hand was gray, the color of a drowned person, and it was wet. Then the face appeared. It came down, upside down from the roof. Because of the wavy glass, I couldn't see the features clearly. It looked like a smudge of white dough. But I saw the eyes. They weren't glowing. They were just large, black holes that reflected nothing. It wasn't looking for me. It was looking at the room, like it was inspecting a cage. It stayed there for 10 minutes. I know, because I watched the digital clock on my bedside table. 10 minutes of this thing, hanging off the roof, pressing its face against my window. Then it did something that still haunts my dreams. It started to mimic the sound of the house. It tapped the glass. Tap, tap. Then it made a creaking sound exactly like the floorboards in the hallway. It was learning. It was practicing the sounds of the home so it could move inside without me noticing. Then it just retracted. It pulled itself back up onto the roof, and I heard it leap into the trees, a heavy crunch of branches, and then silence. I didn't wait for morning. I grabbed my car keys, my phone, and my wallet. I left my clothes. I left my laptop. I ran to my car, and I didn't look at the roof. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I was 10 miles away on the main highway. I called Mr. Henderson the next day from a motel. I told him I'd left and that he could keep the deposit. He didn't ask why. He didn't sound surprised. He just said, "Did you leave the light on, Marcus?" I said, "No. I followed your rule." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he whispered, "Then it must have liked the way you tasted in the air. Don't come back to Vermont, son." I live in a high-rise apartment now. In the city, I need the noise. I need the street lights. People ask me why I never open my blinds at night. I tell them I just like the privacy, but the truth is, I'm terrified of seeing a long, gray finger press against the glass. Because up here, on the 14th floor, there are no trees to climb. And if something is at my window now, it means it followed me. That was Marcus's experience. He told me that he still checks the bark on the trees whenever he has to visit a park, looking for those smooth, filed-down marks. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? We think of the wilderness as a place of escape, but for some, it's a place where we realize we aren't at the top of the food chain. I want to thank Marcus for trusting Veil of Night with this story. He's doing well now, but he says he'll never live in a house with a view ever again. If you've had an encounter in the deep woods or anywhere else that you can't explain, please send it in. You can find the submission link in the description below. Whether it's a ritual, a creature, or something in between, your story deserves to be heard. Until next time, stay safe, keep the curtains closed, and keep the lights on.